Hi, Keith here from Academy of Bass. Everything I played there was using the Minor Pentatonic Scale, and it's a great tool to use to create awesome bass lines and interesting solos too. So if you want to learn how to start using that in your playing, stick around. The minor pentatonic is a really flexible scale that you can use in any musical situation, and it's also the perfect complement to use to play over any minor chord too. Now, I have done a couple of lessons where I've touched on this before, so I'll post links to those below just in case you want to check them out for context. So the minor pentatonic, it's a 5-note scale, and I'm going to start by looking at this in the key of C just for ease, but then I'm going to move it to a different key because I'm going to be playing over a different chord today. So in the key of C, we've got C the root, E flat the flattened third, F the fourth, G the fifth, and B flat the flattened seventh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And of course we can play C the root on top of the octave. And if you look at how I'm playing this, you can see that I'm using my first and third fingers, and that's a great fingering to use if you want to work on your 1 finger per fret fretting technique. But in practice we tend to use our first and fourth fingers. And that's because it allows us to play much more fluid rolling lines, and we can also use techniques like hammer-ons and pull-offs too. Now, if I'm being honest, I tend to use both, and it really depends on the playing situation that I'm playing in, so it's worth practicing both. What I'm going to do now is take this minor pentatonic scale and transfer it to G, because we're playing over a G minor chord today. So in G we've got G the root, B flat the flattened third, C the fourth, D the fifth, and F the flattened seventh, and of course G the octave. Now if we look at this minor chord, and by the way the formula for a minor chord is root, flattened third and fifth, or in this case G, B flat and D. If we superimpose that on top of the minor pentatonic scale, we've only got C the fourth and F the flattened seventh that remain in the scale that aren't within the chord. And if we take that minor chord now and we extend it even further by adding the flattened seventh, so we've got G the root, B flat the flattened third, D the fifth, and F the flattened seventh. And that's a really common thing to do in music, where we take a basic minor chord and we extend it and we turn it into a minor 7 chord. If we superimpose that onto the minor pentatonic scale, we've only got one note, which is C the fourth, that isn't in the chord, and that's why the minor pentatonic scale is such a great fit to play over minor chords. So now that we've learnt the G minor pentatonic scale, I'd like to look at something really quickly just before we get into the main part of this lesson and actually start playing some bass lines. So I'm going to take the scale and play it up an octave. So I'm starting here at the 10th fret of the A string, and we've got G, B flat, C, D, F and G. And I'm going to play this with both fingering variations. And there's another way we can play this too. So starting here with G with our little finger, B flat with our first, C with our little finger, D with our little finger, F with our first finger, and G with our little finger. And coming down, F with our first, D with our little finger, C with our first, B flat with our first, and finally G with our little finger. So the fingering changes when you play it ascending and descending. So when we play it up, we move up with our little finger, and when we come down, we move down with our first finger. And of course we can play that up an octave too. Now you can break this scale up into a series of other patterns too that will help you play it in different positions across the neck. But if you can get to grips with just these 2 variations, you'll be playing great bass lines in no time without the complication of having to learn lots and lots of different patterns. So let's get into the main part of this lesson now and learn how we can start using this scale to play some great bass lines. I'm going to start by playing this really simple groove over our G minor 7 chord. All I'm doing here is playing root, flattened 7th and octave. What I'm going to do now is add the missing notes in the chord. Flattened 3rd and 5th, Now the other scale pattern variation. And up the octave. And now the other variation too. Now I'm going to add the missing note in the scale. That's the 4th C. And up the octave. And the final variation. So what I've done here is I've used every single note in the minor pentatonic scale in this bass line. I'm playing them in order in sequence, and I've applied a bit of rhythm to them. So we've got a really nice bass line that's going to be the foundation for what I'm going to do next, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the scale and I'm going to tear it apart and break it down into small fragments. And I'm going to show you where you can play those fragments across the neck in as many places as possible. And I'm also going to let you hear what they sound like. So I'm going to start with the 3-note fragment, and I'm starting from the root. So we've got root, flat and 3rd and 4th, or G, B flat and C. And we can play this in lots of places. We can play it up an octave here, and we can play it using the 2nd scale pattern variation here, and then here up an octave. And we can also take it up here and here. And that's before we turn it on its head and play and all I'm playing there is G the root, B flat the flat and 3rd, and C the 4th, G the root, B flat the flat and 3rd, and C the 4th. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 variations from one 3-note fragment, which is great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have another playthrough so that you can hear some of these ideas against the bass line and hear what they sound like. So the variations of that 3-note fragment sounded great. Now, I'm not going to play through every single one of these because we'll be here all day, but I will show you the different fragments and show you as many places to play them as possible across the neck. Now, I started with that 3-note fragment from the root, so I'm going to move on now to the flat and 3rd. So now we've got flat and 3rd, 4th and 5th, or B flat, C and D. We can play that up here, or here, or here, or up here, or here, and finally, and now we move on to, which is 4, 5 and flat 7, or C, D and F. Now we can play that here or here, so not as many variations there. And then finally we've got, which is 5 flat and 7th an octave, or D, F and G, which we can play here and here. So we've got 5 3-note fragments that we can play, and we can also play them in reverse. But you can have the fun of playing through them and experimenting with them and see what they sound like. So I've exhausted all of the 3-note fragments that are played in a linear way, and I'm going to move on now to another set of 3-note fragments that are played like this. So I'm going to start with the root, and I'm going to play the 4th and the 5th. So I'm playing G, C and D. So this time I'm playing a little L shape really. So we've got G, C and D, 1, 4, 5. We can play that here or here. We can also play this. We can play C, F and G, or 4 flat and 7th an octave. Or we can play F, B flat and C, flat and 7th, flat and 3rd and 4th. And we can also play that L shape like this. So we can play C, D, G, or 4, 5 and 8. And finally we can play, which is B flat, C and F, or flat and 3rd, 4th and flat and 7th. So we've got another 5 variations there, but this time there aren't as many ways to play them on the neck. So I'm going to stick with the 3-note variations for this final option, and this time I'm going to play 3-note fragments in fourths. So when we play across a string like this interval is a fourth, and I'm going to play 3-note fragments. So the first is G, C and F, or root, fourth and flat seventh. We can also play that up here, or we can play, so I'm playing C, F and B flat, or 4, flat 7, flat third. And then finally we've got D, G and C, or 5, octave or root and fourth. So we've only got 3 variations there, and there aren't as many ways of playing this. Now, the other thing we can do with this is we don't have to play them in groups of 3. We can just play them in groups of 2. Now, fourths sound great in bass lines, but they really come into their own when you use them to improvise in solo. So I'm going to have another really quick playthrough, and in the first half, I'm going to use some fourths as a part of the bass line, and in the second half, I'm going to start using them with some improvised solo ideas. I hope you could hear the contrast there in the fourths that I played as part of the bass line compared to the more free improvised section towards the end. For this last section, I'm going to ditch the 3-note concept, and I'm only going to play groups of 2 notes now. So I'm going to play notes that are a fifth apart. This is probably something that you play all the time. So we've got G to D, or root to fifth, and you can also play that here or up here. And then we've got C to G, which is fourth to root, and you can play that up here or here. And then we've got F to C, which is flat and seventh to fourth, and you can play that here or here. And finally we've got B flat to F, which is flat and third to flat and seventh, and you can play that here and you can play it here too. I'm going to have a final playthrough, and this time I'm going to try and use a bunch of the fragments that I've spoken about in this lesson. The only difference this time is that instead of playing over a static G minor chord, I'm going to move from a G minor chord to a C minor chord and then come back to the G minor chord. Hopefully, when you hear that shift in the harmony, you'll hear the fragments and the impact that the fragments have in a different context. So we've got lots of options there. We've got 4 3-note linear clusters. We've got 5 3-note L-shaped clusters. We've got 3 clusters in fourths. And we've also got 4 sets of 2-note clusters, which is 16 altogether. And if we play them in reverse, that's 32 variations from this one simple 5-note minor pentatonic scale. So there's enough stuff to keep you busy for a really long time. Don't forget to let me know in the comments what you think of this lesson, and make sure you grab the PDF too. I'll post a link to that below. I'll also post a link to the backing track that I've been using today. Feel free to give things the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification. That way you won't miss out on what I'm releasing every week. Thanks for joining me today. Look forward to seeing you again, and in the meantime, happy practicing.